Hi, this is PG of PG's Lumacy. In this tutorial, we will be making an updated version of Hello Kitty made for the single rainbow loom. For the bands, we will be using white for the main body, and then we will be using pink and light pink for the shirt and the overalls. We will be using black for the whiskers and a single yellow band for the nose. For the light pink bands, I picked out the light pink ones from the multi-pack of skin tone bands from Rainbow Loom. We will be making this on a single rainbow loom, and of course we will use the hook. And we will be using white beads for the buttons on the overalls and black seed beads for the eyes. And to string the beads with rubber bands, we will be using a piece of floss. It is good to have a pair of tweezers and a fine crochet hook for the fine details of this design. Let us prepare the seed beads that we will be using for this project. Using a piece of floss that is reinforced on one end, we will string the beads with rubber bands. For the eyes, we will be inserting the floss into 2 black seed beads. And then we will get the white single band onto the floss, and we will reinsert the end of the floss into the beads. That forms a loop that will pull the band into the seed beads. And this is the piece that we will be using for the eyes. Using the same technique, we will insert single pink rubber bands into white beads, and we will only be using a single white bead this time. Okay, we get it into the floss and then get the pink band into it. You will need 2 of these button pieces for the project. So let's make that other one. We will start our layout on these pins. They're the second from the top. And we will begin by placing double white bands on these center pins vertically. Unless otherwise specified, we will be using double bands for this project. Okay. Next, let us place horizontal bands on these pins. And let us do that on the other side as well. Then, let us place diagonal bands. First on these 2 pins, and then let us do that on the other side as well. It's a good habit to push down on the bands to make room for the bands that we will be adding to them. Let us place a row of white double bands next. Then, let us add another row of double white bands. Make sure you push down on all the bands that you have so far. And then, because we are adapting this design from an extended loom, we need to work in layers. So let us add our additional layer. First, we place vertical bands on these 2 pins. And then another vertical bands on the next pin and onto the next. We put an additional layer of bands on top. Let us do that again on this other side. Now we need to lay out the bands for the ears, and we will be working one ear at a time. Let's start with this side. Okay. First, we place a pair of bands on these pins, and then add another pair to these pins. Then we add a diagonal pair to these two pins, and we will add a capping band wrapped 4 times on this top right pin. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now let us loop the bands for the ears. Okay. Go into the capping band and grab the pair of diagonal bands and loop to this center pin. Okay. Now grab the vertical band or pair of bands, get them out of the get them out of the pin. It's a little bit tight, there you go, and then loop to this pin. Then grab the double bands, okay, and then loop to this pin. Note that I only got the band on the top layer. Okay, then let's get these bands out of the way. And then let us move these bands, all 4 loops, onto this pin. Okay, so that will be the piece for the ears, or the ear on this side. Let us work on the other side, and I will not be speeding up the video for that. Okay, I will repeat the procedure. Let's place 2 bands on these 2 pins, 2 bands on these 2 pins, and then diagonal bands, again 2 diagonal bands on these 2 pins, and we will cap with a band looped 4 times. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, let us loop the bands for this ear. Okay, get the diagonal band out of the pin and then loop it to this center pin. Okay, and then get this vertical band out of the pin and then loop to this pin. You will see that we are looping in the opposite direction. Okay, and then let us grab these bands, only the ones on the top layer, and there's 2 of them, and then we will get it out of the pin. You can hold on to this and then loop to this pin over here. Okay, and then we get this band or these bands out of this pin, and then move these bands to that same pin. Okay, and that will be for the ears. For those of you who made this on the extended loom, this will be a slight variation on the design itself. And I chose to do this because it is a lot easier in adapting it for the single loom. Now with that done, let us go back to this section over here. And let us add our horizontal bands. Again, we get 2 white bands and place them on these 2 pins. And another pair of bands for the other side. Working on the body now. Let's start with 2 light pink bands on this pair of pins in the center. Okay, and then we will grab our pink bands and place them diagonally on these 2 pins and on the other side as well. Now we will be adding a row of pink bands to these pins, but we will be using the bands that we made for the buttons. Okay, so let us place one of them on this side and then grab a single pink band and place it on top of that band. So it will still be double bands, but one of them has a seed bead. Let's do that on the other side. The band with the seed bead, then we add a band without a seed bead, and it forms the double bands. For this center pair of pins, we will add our pink double bands. Then let us add a row of pink bands to this row. And let's push on the bands. Then add another row of pink bands. Then let us add double bands only on the side pins. And then we will add diagonal bands to these pins towards the center. Again, because we are working on a single loom, we need to add layers. So let's push down on the bands that we have thus far to add our second layer. Let's start on this side. We will add a chain of 3 double bands to this side. Okay, that is 1, 2, 3. A chain of 3 double bands forming a top layer on this side. Let's do that on the other side as well. Now we can add our bands for the legs. Okay, let's grab 2 white bands and then 4 white bands all together on the next pins. And we will place a capping band on this pin looped 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Let's do that again for the other leg. 2 bands, 4 bands, and then a capping band looped 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. We will be using these empty pins in the bottom to make our arm pieces. So for the arm pieces, let's start with 3 light pink bands on these pins, and then 2 white bands on these pins. Then let us add 3 white bands on these bottom pins. And we will add a capping band looped 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Let us loop the bands for the arms. And we get these bands out of the loom. Okay. And we will place them on this pin, which I call the shoulder pin. You can now pause or rewind the video to make another arm piece, and then we will place it on this other shoulder pin. This is the other arm piece that we made, and let us place it on this shoulder pin. Now let us place the horizontal bands that will hold these vertical bands together and also give us the shape that we like for our piece. And let us place our horizontal band on this row of pins. We just need to place a single band on all 3 pins on this row. And for this row, we will add a single band first on these 2 pins, and then we will loop the band to this center pin and then pull it all the way to the 3rd pin. And I call that the 1 1/3 looped band. For the head part, we will place a single white band on this row of pins, and we will not be adding a horizontal band on this row. Instead, the piece for the eyes that we made will act as the horizontal band for this row. So let us place the eye piece that we made on this row, and make sure that the band holding the seed beads will be on the bottom side of this pin, not around it, not on top of it, but on this bottom side of this center pin. So this is how the layout will look like with the bands in place. This will be a good time to pause the video and compare your work with the one on the screen. Let's start looping our bands. Beginning with the leg pieces, we go into the capping band and grab the 4 bands underneath and loop them to the forward pin. And then loop the double bands to this pin. If you find it hard to grab all 4, you could grab 2 at a time. Okay, and then go back for the other 2, and it will have the same results. Now loop these double bands. When you get to this section, we will need to work on the outer bands, which are on the top layers. Okay, so let's work on this side. Let's grab the double bands on top, loop them to this pin, and we will loop up to here. Okay, let's work on this other side. We are grabbing only the bands on the top layers. Okay, now let us get these bands out of the way, making sure that we are not twisting or flipping the bands as we get them out of the way. Okay, and we pull them outwards a bit to get them in place. Now we can work on the bands underneath, starting with these diagonal bands. Now let us get these bands. They are somewhat hidden, so make sure you don't miss them. Okay, let's work this row. Okay, and then this row. Now, when you get to this row, we will loop the bands. And then we will get the bead to the front part. So we go into all these bands, and then we grab the bead and get it to the front part, like so. Okay, we use the hook to nudge it to the front part. Let's do that on the other side as well. We loop the bands, and we loop them over the arm pieces. And then we go back to get the bead to the front. Being careful not to break your bands. Okay, we got it out. And then we get the hook out of there. Okay, so that gets the beads to their position up front. And now let us loop this band or pair of bands. Now we get to this section over here, and for a neat look on our design, we will loop the diagonal bands first. Like so. And then don't forget to loop this center pair of bands. Sometimes these bands can be hidden, and when we are looping, we can miss them. And when we do that, our design will fall apart when we pull it off the loom. Now we get to this section, and we are going to work on these horizontal bands. So let us get the ones that are on top, and in my case it would be these bands. So I go into these bands on the center pin and then loop that pair of bands. Okay, being careful not to break it. You can grab a a crochet hook and use the bottom end of the crochet hook to release the band from being pressed or pinched by these heavy layers of bands. Let us get these bands now. Okay. Again, use the bottom end of a crochet hook to release the bands. And then you can loop these center white bands as well. Let us loop the bands for the head. And when we get to this head section, there are several things that we need to do to get the desired shape for Hello Kitty. So what we do is we get this horizontal band out of this pin for now and just leave it at the center pin. Then going into these loops, we need to grab these bands. Okay. We grab only the top bands on these pins. Then we get these loops out of the pin and we keep them on the hook. Okay. Then we grab 2 additional white bands and we place them on this pin. Then we grab the band that we took from this pin, and if you have an extra hook, you can use it to place this horizontal band back on this pin where we took it from. Okay, so now you have your loops on the hook, and then you have these bands on this pin. What we do is we grab one end of these bands and get them into the loops on the pin, on the hook, I'm sorry. Okay, and that forms a new set of loops that we now loop to this pin. So what happened there was that we were able to add 2 additional bands to this side so that we will get the roundish shape for Hello Kitty's face. From there, we will loop these bands. So we go into this pin and we grab these. I'm making sure I'm getting only the 2 bands up top. Okay, there you go. And then we loop them to this pin. And then we are now looking for this pair of bands. So we will go into this loop, this pin, and then grab those bands and then loop them to this pin over here. Okay, so now let us work on the other side. I will not speed up the video for this. I will repeat the procedure. First, let us get this horizontal band out of this pin on this side, and then we just let it sit on this center pin for now. And then we grab this pair of bands and we loop it to the forward pin. And then we grab all the loops from this band and we keep them on the hook and then just let them sit there for now. we grab our additional white bands and we place them on this pin, and then we grab this horizontal band that we got out of that pin and put it back. An additional hook will be helpful, but if not, you could just pick it up from there and then put it back to its place. Okay, now we will grab one end of these additional bands and then loop them into the loops on the hook. Okay, and then we loop that to this pin on this side. Okay, and then we go for these bands, only the ones on the top. Okay, and then we go for these bands. We go into this pin and then grab those two bands. Okay, you will notice that before I pull them out, I make sure that I'm grabbing the right bands, because once you pull them out and you grab the wrong bands, it is rather difficult to put them back. So I pull them out and then I loop, okay, to this pin. Now we have to get these top layer bands out of the way, starting with this side, and make sure you are not flipping or twisting the bands as you get them off the pins. Okay. And this band that's holding the seed bead needs to go below or under this pin. We don't want it around it. We want it on this section over here. Okay. And we keep these here. Let's go to the other side. Again, it's the same principle. We are not flipping or twisting the bands as we set them aside. Get them off the pins very carefully. And then again, we would like this band to be on the bottom side of this pin and not above it. So see that? You will be able to manipulate this band holding the seed beads for the eyes. Okay, now we can work on the bottom layer. So in working the bottom layer, let's go for this side. We are looping these bands. Okay. Go into this pin, get these bands out, and then loop. And loop. And then loop this diagonally to here. Okay, let's work on this side now. Same thing, we go into these bands or these loops. Okay, and loop that diagonally. Then let us loop these horizontal bands. Okay, and now what remains would be these two bands in the middle. But before we loop these bands, we first need to add our yellow band for the nose. So we loop it twice on this pin, and then we loop the bands underneath. Okay, and then we get these bands and loop to the top. This is how the layout will look like after we have looped the bands. You can pause the video and compare your work with this one on the screen. Now we need to secure these top loops, so grab a single white band and go into all those loops, and then get a single band onto your hook. Okay, then get it into that spot and then secure with a knot like so. Okay, and with that, you're now ready to pull this entire piece off the loom. And it's good to use the bottom end of a crochet hook to pry the heavy layers off the loom so that you don't break them. Okay, stretch out your piece. Okay, to finish this piece, first we need to pull the ears upwards. Then we even out the stretch on these bands. Okay, and then this yellow band, pull one end of it from the back, so you will only have a small portion of it showing in the front. And for the eyes, we need to move them to the other side. Okay, and then for the legs, if you want your figure to look like it's standing up, then you could just leave the legs as is. But I have decided to have my figures for this Sanrio character series to be in a seated position. So I pull these bands from the back, the ones holding the legs, I pull them from the back, and that folds the leg forward, okay, to make it look like my figure is in a sitting position. Okay, so fine tune the shape. And we will be adding the whiskers to this, but before we add the whiskers, make sure you do all the pulling, you do all the stretching, because once the whiskers are in place, then it will be hard to reshape the figure. For the whiskers, we are using 3 single bands for each side of the face. I have already worked on the other side, so I would like to show you how to make the remaining whiskers for the other side. Okay, so I'm pulling on my bands so they will be more manageable, and it also lengthens them. Okay, being very careful that you don't break them. Okay, and then you cut the bands. we would like to get to this section over here, these two bands near the eyes. There are two bands in here, and I would like to get in between those two bands. So I go to the back of the figure and insert my hook into these bands. Okay, and then I turn to the other side, and then I get into that spot. Like so. Okay, so I get to that spot, and then I grab my black bands and then pull one end of these black bands into that spot until I get out the back, like so. Okay, so one end will be in the front and one end will be in the back. So make sure you have enough length of the band in the back. Okay, pull them out some more if you don't have that length that you need. We would like to tuck in these ends at the back. We would like to tuck them into this band or these bands over here. So I pull them in one by one. Find it easier that way. Okay, and that will hold this end securely, like so. Okay, now I go to the front, and I make sure that my bands from the front are not twisted. Okay, it's easier to do this with the figure upside down. So one will go this way, one will go this way, and the other will go in the middle. Okay, so one by one, let's pull our bands in. Let's start with this band. Okay, I would like it to be held in this spot, like here. So I insert my hook, and then I even go into this band over here, just so it will be held securely. See that? And then I will pull it in. So now this one, I would like to go into this spot over here. So which bands, okay, which bands will hold it? I think this pair of bands will be a good spot. So I play my hook, I insert my hook, and then pull my band into that spot, like so. And then for the middle one, okay, this would be a good pair of bands to hold them in place. So I pull the middle one into that spot. Then I make sure that there is some slack in my band. I make sure it's not, the bands are not pulling too much into the face. Okay. When I'm happy with the way my bands look from the front, I go to the back and I tuck in their edges in the same band that's holding the other ends. Okay. I'm tucking the ends of these bands just like I did the other ends earlier. Okay, I pull them into this spot over here, and once they're all in that spot, I once again check for the slack. Okay, like there's too much slack on this middle one, So using a pair of tweezers, I pull it in more. Okay. Until I get the look of the whiskers that I like. If there's too much slack, pull them in. If they're pressing onto the face too much, then pull them out. And once you get the look that you like, okay. I think this slipped out of there. Let's pull it in. Okay, once you get the look that you like, you're happy with the look, you can shorten these ends. You could cut these ends with a pair of scissors. Okay, but let me just make sure they're tucked in, so they're secure. Okay. And then, okay, I don't even need to cut mine, but just to show you what I did, okay, I just cut them short, so it'll be easier to tuck them in and conceal them with the bands in the back, like so. Okay, and that is how we place the whiskers. Let us make a bow for Hello Kitty, and you could use pink if you like, but I am using red for this one. So place a single band on this bottom 2 pins, and then place a double loop band across these 3 pins. To make the double loop band, you get a single band across all 3 pins and then loop it back, like so. Okay, and then you even out the stretch on the double loop band for a better looking bow. Okay, and then get this side over to the other side, like so. And then loop this band in the middle, and then tie a knot with it, like so. Okay, and then get the piece of the loom, and you will get what looks like a bow. Okay, let's find a spot for this bow on Hello Kitty's head. I think this would be a good spot for it. So go into these bands and pull this band in until you get it to that spot, like so. Okay, and then hide the red band, hide it into the back pieces. Okay, so just hide all these bands in the back pieces. This yellow band from the nose, just tuck it in. Okay, and there you have it, Hello Kitty made on the single rainbow loop.